Hi everybody, I'm Julia Taylor and we are here today to talk about planting tomatoes for Mother's Day. I'm here with Sharon Flynt of the Scott County Cooperative Extension Horticultural Office.
With the horticulture program.
With the horticulture program. And we're going to talk about transplanting tomatoes and everything we really need to know.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's everything you need to know about tomatoes, but a lot of these are tips and tricks that will help you really, if you've never quite had a tomato plant, you think, it always dies on me, it always looks sick. Hopefully some of these tips will help you avoid that. Okay. Well, the first thing that I guess we need to talk about is the tomato plant. Now, there are two types of tomatoes. I don't know if you've noticed this before, but on the little tag that's in there, not only does it tell you about the light that it needs and all of that sort of thing, but it will tell you whether it is determinate or indeterminate. Now, people have heard that and they're like, what does that mean? And it can be a little confusing. If you have a determinate tomato, you have one that is going to set all of its blooms pretty much at the same time or like within a short period of time. And the reason it does that is it just sets all the blooms, and then after that, after the tomatoes have grown, you have a good crop of tomatoes on your plant, then it generally stops producing, or it may produce one or two.
Okay.
And it's like, well, I don't want that. I want one that produces all summer long. Why would you have a tomato plant like this, or why would you want one? Well, if you're a home canner, this would be the type of plant that would help you out, because all of the production goes into producing the bloom. You see the blooms on here now. This actually is aroma, like a paste tomato. Of course, you would make a paste out of that. And so instead of having to wait for one tomato to ripen here and two or 3 days later another one, these all sort of ripen evenly, and so that you can go out there, pick your crop, and go into the kitchen and start your tomato paste. So you have a good amount of tomatoes all at the same time.
Gotcha.
So this is what we call a determinate tomato. It's determined to go ahead and put all of those tomatoes out there right now so that you can start your canning process. Determinates are usually short and stocky plants for the most part. You may or may not have to cage this particular plant. This one is a little floppy, but I think it's just because it's had a cage on it since the beginning. Now, one thing I do want to point out when you are planting tomatoes, and I have been guilty of this, when you look on here, you already see blooms on there, right? And sometimes if it's later in the season, you may even see some little tomatoes already on the tomato plant at the store. And you think, oh good, I'm ahead of the game. No. Because what you'll do is you'll take this back and you'll transplant it into a large pot, because determinants, pretty much you can do some of that. Some of them are good for just having them in a pot, or planting them in your garden. And so you'll have transplant shock. And if it has transplant shock, which means it's getting used to a new environment, those roots are starting to send out through the soil, plus it's trying to boost off these blooms and go ahead and make fruit, you really put a drag on the plant. So you really do more harm than good in thinking you're going to get an early tomato. Okay. So the best thing to do when you bring this home is just go ahead and start picking off all of those little buds and blooms. And we'll discuss later some more planting tips, but while I had this one up here, I wanted to tell you, I've done it before. I thought, oh boy. And actually what I've noticed is that the ones that I've bought early and left these on, they produce much later and seem to struggle a little more than the tomato plants that just started off without.
I've been making that mistake.
Yeah.
So I didn't know to do that. Okay.
Well, it's an easy
Already I've improved.
You seem to think, well, that should make sense, but
right.
There's a reason behind it. Now let's say some of you all have started your seeds indoors. Here are a couple of tomatoes that we see that were started indoors. And actually, these aren't really ready to start outside. If you take a close look at them, you can see that they have these long skinny leaves. Those are the first new leaves. When it first sprouts, those are the ones that come out. You want to transplant it into a larger pot when you start to see the true leaves come out, which are those familiar tomato leaves that you see here. They have the little edging around them and that sort of thing. So that's when these are ready to go into a larger pot to grow out a little more before you put it into your garden. So, Julia, you and I are going to do that. It's pretty simple. What you want to do is get your pot. Now, this is a little peat pot, okay? And these, they say, are biodegradable, which they are, but it takes them a while. So, once you start to put the plant into the garden, I wouldn't leave this on there particularly. I would take it off, because, and especially if you do not plant your plant deep enough, this little rim, and this is for any plant, this little fiber rim here acts as a wick, and it'll wick all the moisture out of the soil, and it'll kill your plant for lack of moisture. So, you know, even though you can plant it in here, I would peel it off because it does inhibit the roots, and it does take a while for it to biodegrade. I've still got some that I sort of threw in a pot and think, oh yeah, I'll just let it. Right. They're still in there. I still see them. So anyway, what we want to do then, Julia, is go ahead and fill this up. And this is a potting, this is actually a transplant soil. So it may have, it's well drained, and it may have more organic matter in it. When you start seeds, you don't need all of that. Generally, all you need is a well-drained media, because the little seed has everything it needs to go to start growing. All it needs is warmth and moisture. So when you transplant it up, then that's when you want to start adding maybe a media that has some organic matter in it, or maybe, you know, if you buy it in a bag, maybe some little fertilizer pellet things in it, you know, that sort of thing. So we've actually got way too much soil in here, but that's okay. So now here's our plants. And if we were planting these, if these were any other plant, generally, any other vegetable plant other than a tomato plant, you would want to plant the plant right at the level in the soil or in the new pot you're putting in, right at the very level that it was growing in. But there's always, you know, that's the rule. However, this is the exception to the rule. Okay. Tomato plants, and if you want to, and just go ahead, I've got this, I'll take it outside and shake it. We're going to go ahead and peel that off, because I don't want it in there. And you're going to delicately hold on and look, and you can see some little fine roots. Now, a lot of people think, oh, I've got to be very careful, and you do, but maybe not as careful as you think. In fact, sometimes if you break a few little roots, that just invigorates the plant to go ahead and create some more.
I have heard that before. But...
So, you can see that right down here at the bottom is where the plant was in the pot, right there, right? Now with tomatoes, it's one of the few plants that you could do this with. You actually want to plant it deeper than it was in the pot, because a tomato plant has tissue all up and down the stem that will create roots. So the deeper you plant it, the better off it's going to be, because it's going to produce all kinds of roots there. And it'll be a nice foundation for that plant. Also be more roots for it to get nutrients and that sort of thing. So you can see I just put this in there, and I mean planted it right. All you see, and a lot of times all you can see is just your top leaves. Okay. Yours could have gone a little deeper.
Well, you know, I realized that's the second thing I haven't been doing right with my tomato. No wonder I can't get them to grow.
That's all right. No, it could go a little deeper, because it will. Now, it won't hurt it. I mean, you know, it'll still go ahead and produce its roots, but you want to take advantage of that special tissue that produces roots, because roots are very important for your plant. So after you've transplanted one like that, then you want to go ahead, and especially at this size, it'll probably go on for another maybe 3 to 4 weeks before we actually transplant. An indeterminate is exactly the opposite of our determinate plant. It will continue to produce tomatoes throughout the season, which is generally for your everyday use, or if you want a sandwich slicer or tomatoes for, that sort of thing.
More what I want.
Yeah, if that's what you want and you don't plan on canning at all, then you want to make sure that you get determinate plants, because they will just continue to produce tomatoes. If everything is right, they'll just continue to do that until either frost or something kills it.
Okay.
Like a disease, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So that is a determinate plant. It will just keep on producing. Let's see. So when you're looking for plants, I know we've got the heirloom craze. Everyone loves heirlooms, and they are. They're, pretty unusual when you see them. Taste really good a lot of times, and it feels good to be using something that is old and like you're keeping alive a heritage there. However, sometimes they are more prone to diseases. So also, if you're looking for a tomato, you're buying one and you're a first-time tomato grower, or not quite sure, when you look on your tag, you want to look for words like disease resistant, or you want to see little letters out to the side like VFN. V stands for verticillium, F stands for fusarium, and N stands for nematodes. And those are all things that can attack your tomato plant. But having those letters on that there means that this plant has been bred to be resistant to those diseases and even to the nematodes. Now I say resistant. It could still, if everything was against it and, it was in a terrible place and struggling already anyway, the plant was stressed, it could actually get that. But those little letters that you see there will help you put an edge where you can have a better tomato crop.
What are those again? VFN?
Well, some will say VFN.
Okay.
Some will also have like EB, LB. Those are early blight, late blight. And here in central Kentucky, a lot of the diseases that I see start up in the summer will be like early blight. And generally early blight is your leaves and stems will start to die and fade. And it goes all the way up until you have a little sprig at the top and a few little tomatoes. I've had people call me all the time about that. And that doesn't mean it's over, but when you see them starting to die there at the bottom, you want to cut away those dead branches and destroy them, because they have that early blight disease on there that can be passed on to other tomato plants.
So what about groundhogs? Is there a tomato that is resistant to groundhogs?
Groundhogs, rabbits, things like that. Or cutworms, like sometimes there's cutworms and it'll cut it right off.
Oh, okay.
When you plant it, you may want to, well, I don't have one, but let's say this was like a Dixie cup or a yogurt cup or something. You may want to cut it off and then cut down where you can make a little collar, and then just set that little collar around the bottom of your tomato plant, and that'll help, and make sure it's down into the soil but up as well.
Okay.
That'll help against any kind of chewing insect that's there to snip your tomato off. Also, like a deterrent for rabbits and groundhogs and things like that, that can be a little,
I know.
that can be hard.
I didn't really think there was
If
one.
you can have a dog there or something that's going to, we've all seen those things where, like aluminum foil things that flash in the sun, stuff like that. You really need a scare tactic for that type of animal, or something that's going to get rid of it. So that's generally what you have there. But yeah, you want to look for disease resistance. Let's see. The next thing, if you're going to say today's Mother's Day, you're going to start planting these outside. Well, hopefully you've given it a little thought ahead of time, and you've got a place that's going to get at least 6 to 8 hours of sunlight, because our tomatoes do need sunlight, that much sunlight. Also, you're going to look for a well-drained soil, something, and around here, a lot of times we have clay.
Yes.
So that's why I said you might have wanted to think about it a little ahead of time so you can sort of amend your soil where you're going to put your tomatoes, or maybe consider putting some in a big pot or a raised bed. Raised beds are good for planting tomatoes, okay? So those are the things you want to consider. Now when you begin to plant it, now this is our indeterminate, and we're just going to take him out. It's a big boy. And let's say you're going to plant it. You want to squeeze this, pop that off. Now, this one doesn't have a lot of roots on it, and actually it looks like maybe this one has just been transplanted like ours that we did. Because see, you can still see the little block of soil on it. And you can see, you want to see little white veins there, it looks like. Those are the roots. You can actually break those up gently, but you do want to sort of break them up because you don't want your tomato to stay, the roots to stay in the same shape, right? So you can break that up, and when, as I said earlier, when you break that up, it actually stimulates the root system. It's like, ooh, let's produce some more, okay? So here we have our tomato. I usually like to take that edge off of the top of it, you know, where it was in the pot, so it's a little more rounded. Okay, now we're going to plant this deep. This one you can plant deep as well, but I'm going to take off all of these other little, there's some suckers there. Usually you'll find suckers in the axils. See how this comes down? That little space right there, and there's a little leaf coming up between that. That's a sucker. And a lot of times it depends on what you want to do with it. If you're trying to grow big, large tomatoes, just a few of them, then you want to go ahead and sucker your tomato plants. But research shows that if you don't really sucker your plant, you'll still have tomatoes, and you may have even more than you would have, but they will be smaller. So, you know, you sacrifice something for something else. So, but I will, to get ready to plant, we're going to sucker those, and also I'm going to go ahead and take off these lower branches.
Okay, yeah.
And then, see, this is one that's coming off to the side. I'm even going to take him off.
Does that make them less prone to disease?
What, this?
Taking the lower branches off?
Well, yeah, because we're going to plant this deep, and it's going to, you know, those lower branches won't be trying to grow as well. Because what we're trying to do is produce roots, and when you injure this side of that tissue that makes up the stem of the tomato, that, just like the roots, will stimulate it to go, okay, we need to grow, we need to take care of this, and that sort of thing. Also, you're snipping off, like, a lot of nutrients went into that. And we don't want to grow this side branch. We want to start off with this. Okay. So that would be what it would look like. I would leave it like that. Now, you can either dig down deeply, and our little tray here is not deep enough. Because if I were to dig down deeply into here, I would want to plant it right like that.
Oh, wow.
You have a little bit of stem where it's just one stem above the soil, right like that. Or, and a lot of old timers, I'll say, have told me this is the way they plant theirs. Or you could actually, as you go along in your garden, create a trench and you lay it sideways.
Oh.
And then you cover it over. And that trench, you know, about, I don't know, it depends on how much you have up here, but it's like 3 to 4 inches deep, and it's a long trench. And now we have got, this tomato is planted this way, long ways. And here, this will be where your plant will start coming up. Now right now it's sort of bending that way, but once it gets in there, you water it in, and the sunlight gets on it. Sunlight will, you know, make it go straight, and it'll come up. But it'll also have all of these roots along here to help stabilize it and make it a nice, strong, and healthy plant. So that would be the way you can transplant your tomatoes. So remember, this is the one plant that you can plant a lot deeper than where it was in the pot, and even you can plant it sideways and have that whole stem laying there underground.
I've never seen anyone do that.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, it is good. Now with our indeterminates, because they continue to grow, You will have to stake these. If you don't stake them, and believe me, I've seen this before and probably have been guilty of it. But if you don't stake them, they just sort of sprawl all over everything, and they're laying on the ground, and that just invites disease. So, you know, if that hasn't worked for you in the past, then I would try to stake these up as they get larger. You know, however, you could have tomato cages. My husband has a cattle fence panel that he actually takes every summer, puts it up as his play, and he'll actually sort of tie them very gently to that cattle panel so they can grow all the way up, and they will. And the cattle panels, you know, can be pretty tall because he has it sitting up. So 2 or 3 weeks before, if not even earlier, say early in the spring, when this will be for next year if you haven't done it this year, what you want to do is get a soil test that will tell you what kind of nutrients, if any, you need to add to your soil. It'll also tell you the pH. Tomatoes like to grow in a soil that is between like a 6.2 to a 6.8 pH. So, you know, if you can provide that for them from the start, then that's going to be better for your tomatoes. Now you say, well, how do I do a soil test and how much is that going to cost? I've already bought all these tomatoes. Well, the Cooperative Extension Office, we provide soil test free of charge. And what I would need would be 2 cups of soil from your garden. So let's say your garden is as big as this conference table here. I don't think you can see it, but it's like a 4 by 12 or 4 by 8, something like that. If your garden is this big and you were going to plant tomatoes in it, then you would go around. First you get a clean bucket and a clean trowel. And do not get a bucket that is galvanized, because the zinc in the galvanization that was used in that will throw off your soil test. So you want to go around with your trowel, dig down about 4 to 6 inches, and just pretend you make an imaginary X, and then like take one at that axis, one here, one in the middle, and come out here and take another one. Take about 4 or 5, right? You throw all of those into the bucket, mix them around, and then you just put them into your soil bag here, or if you haven't stopped by the office to get a free soil bag, you can put them in Ziplocs. I've had them in Cool Whips. You know, I've had them in everything.
Something's been galvanized.
Yeah.
It's say it on the label.
Yeah, so it doesn't, well, usually you'll see those silver ones, you know, like a plastic bucket, a mop bucket is probably your best bet.
Okay.
Or even a tub like this, if you have one, you know, just drag it out there. And then you fill this up to about, usually it's about 1.5 cups to 2 cups. But you want to make sure that it's up to that. There's a fill line on there, and that fill line means when the bag is totally popped out. So that's about 2 cups of soil. Then you bring that into the office. We take your information. I will take your soil samples over to the University of Kentucky Soil Lab, because all Cooperative Extension offices are outreaches of the University of Kentucky. And they will work their test, I was going to say magic, but they will do tests on
science.
Yeah. And then they will send back that information to me, and then I will make recommendations. So let's say that your soil is really alkaline, it's a high pH, then I may recommend that you put some sulfur on it to help bring down that pH more within the optimal growing level for your tomatoes, okay? And remember, all of this is free of charge, so take advantage of it. And it usually takes about 5 to 10 working days to get back. This time of year, it can be pretty busy, so it may take a little bit longer, either on their end or even on our end. Sometimes I've had soil tests just stacked, waiting for me to go in there and read them all and then make recommendations.
Can you manipulate the soil after you've already done the planting, or is it really more of a pre-planting?
Well, you can. After it, yes. However, it's better if you do it ahead of time, especially in dealing with pH, because any additive that you are going to put on the soil to adjust your pH either up or down, it takes over time.
Gotcha.
You know, it takes over time. Usually I'll recommend, like if someone's lawn needs liming, I'll say put that lime on in the fall so that it has all winter long with the rain and that sort of thing, and the freeze and thaw to really work in there and sort of react with what it needs to react with that's in the soil and do some good. So, yeah, you can add it at that time, but don't expect to see
Great results.
miracles, you know.
Yeah. And then what would you do if it's acidic?
If it's too acidic, then we would add lime.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right, there we go.
yeah. But here in Kentucky, and especially central Kentucky, usually ours is more to the alkaline side because we have all of this limestone underneath of us.
Yeah.
And that calcium in the limestone and everything, and it makes it more alkaline. Maybe on that line too, though, really. So we're pretty blessed with our soil here. Now, when you start to plant your tomatoes, a lot of people say, well, you know, I'm getting late blight, or I'm getting, no, not late blight usually, but early blight or something like that. So when you plant them, now remember you planted it like this, but you need to provide space between your plants. Mm-hmm. You know, if you only have a small space, think about just putting 1 or 2 plants in. If you want to do something where you have tomatoes for, you know, all summer long to give to you and your neighbors, you need to plan for an area that's big enough. And especially if you put them in rows, like traditional rows in a garden, you want those rows to be like 4 feet apart. Okay. And you want the plants to be planted about 2 feet apart, because this allows for air circulation. And that's what happens with the blights usually, and even some of the other diseases, is that there's not enough air circulating. So if there's any type of a little spore that's floating around, you know, and it lands on there, it may find the perfect home there. Also, when you water, you want to water early in the morning if you can, so that the plant will dry, or the leaves will dry. And you really don't want to just water the plant. You want to water the ground next to it. Okay. Because when you water the plant, you have that moist area, and warmth and moisture and little air circulation is the perfect breeding ground for all kinds of diseases. They're like, woohoo, this is our party house, and they move into your tomato.
And I can be bad about like crowding things, because I want to see them all together, but if, you know, with time they'll grow and they'll be exactly where you want.
And even if they get a little bushy, you know, like this, now this is our determinate, but you could even sometimes, if they get a little too bushy, go in there and trim them back a little bit. And with your indeterminates, you know, go in there and pull some of those suckers, because you want air to be able to get through the plant as well. That air circulation is really important. Okay? Now, the one thing I want to tell you, that because it is Mother's Day, this is the perfect time to plant your tomatoes. Because in Kentucky, in central Kentucky here, our last frost date on average is between Derby Day, which is the first Saturday in May, and Mother's Day, which is the second Sunday in May. So if you plant, it's before that, the last frost date is. So if you plant within that window, or think, you know, this weekend I'm going to plant and it's Derby weekend, you're probably okay. That odds are for you that you won't have a frost. But remember, it's nature, and it's Kentucky. So, because last year on May the 15th, which was after Mother's Day, that last year, we had a hard freeze. Not a frost. Frost is where you see the little ice, you know, on your plant, and you cover them up with sheets. It was actually a hard freeze, which anything out, and especially like a tomato plant, it would have killed it, and they would turn black and just die. So you want to plant your tomatoes sometime between Derby Day and Mother's Day. A lot of people try to push it earlier. A lot of stores that you see will have tomatoes out in, you know, March and April, but you don't want that, and I'll show you why. This little plant right here, see that there's some whiteness on there?
Yeah.
Now, if I were going to a store and preparing to buy, I would overlook this plant for many reasons. First of all, it's a light green. It doesn't look too healthy. Also, it's got deadness here. It's like, well, that could be lack of water, or it could be something else, so we'll bypass that. Also, with this lightness here, that's like, what's going on with that? But with this particular plant, that's because of the frost, because it's been too cold, and it was out too early uncovered. okay? So I would bypass that plant. And so if you plant your tomatoes out, any time before that May date, you run the risk of killing them. And then you'll head back to the store to buy more, which they love. That's great, right?
We don't like that.
It's frustrating to you. Okay, so when we do plant this, even though we've treated the soil, you can add a little liquid fertilizer, something really light, like a 5-5-5 or something,
Okay.
and maybe even half it with some water. Don't use the full strength. And water it along that stem where you've laid it out there, avoiding the leaves. Remember, we don't want our leaves to get wet. And you want to water it deeply, and that will give it a good start. Now, I will say, do not fertilize once the fruit and flowers set. Let's say this is sometime in late May, and this plant here, well, I think I picked them all off. But it had all of the blooms and everything on it.
Yeah.
Once they start to bloom and set fruit, do not add fertilizer to them. Because what happens is all of that fertilizer goes to create nice, healthy green leaves. They'll get dark green, they'll be nice and robust, but it does that at the disadvantage of the fruit and the flowers.
I see.
And a lot of times, some tomato plants will just stop producing fruit and flowers altogether because they've got too much nitrogen. Okay? Let's see. I think that's about it for the most part. What else do you have? Do you have any other questions?
We know how to water them correctly. We know how to look for diseases. We know that we have to give up with the woodchucks and the groundhogs. Yeah, the only other thing is, the insect control, we keep them all separately. So I can't think of anything except, is there a good way to know when you should harvest the tomato? Should you harvest it early, let it yellow on your on your counter, or should you wait till it's completely ripe?
Well, a lot of people, you hear in marketing all the time, vine ripened tomatoes.
Right.
And I don't know how many times that I've had a vine ripened tomato that I've walked out and thought, that is a beautiful tomato. Tomorrow it'll be better.
Yeah.
I will wait. And when I come back in the morning the next day, a raccoon or who knows or deer get in it.
Yeah,
they will have taken it away. So, if you have a big production of tomatoes, you can afford to let some vine ripen.
Okay.
There's hopefully, unless you have a lot of wildlife population around your home, things won't come in and grab them. However, when you start seeing your tomatoes, and it depends on what type of tomato you have, yellow tomatoes are different and that sort of thing. But for a red tomato, and even for yellow tomatoes and other colors, you want to start to see those shoulders start to turn and watch them there, and then let that color turn from the shoulders down and get it a little more.
Shoulders of the tomato.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the plant.
Oh, yeah. No, the tomato. I don't have a tomato. I had some on my windowsill. I should have brought them in. But yeah, you want to see those shoulders there start to turn. At that point, when you start to see a color come in there and it starts to move on down halfway, even a little bit more of your tomato, you're probably safe to go ahead and pick that and maybe bring it inside and put it on a windowsill where it gets sun and let it, because it will continue to ripen.
So if, say, something crazy happens, like last year, and there is a frost and we've already planted, what's the best way to cover your plants? I've heard some things that might not be as helpful as others.
Okay, well, you wouldn't want to cover them with plastic.
Yeah.
You don't want to cover with plastic because you'll get a greenhouse effect there, and it can get really warm. We actually had a little low tunnel in our garden this winter with snow all over the top of it, and it was just essentially layers of clear plastic over some hoops that we had in the garden. And we grew radishes and kale and things and turnips all winter long, and they looked great. So it was warm enough. So it really heats up under there. So you don't want to cover it with any type of plastic or anything like that. You can always cover it with, of course, it's old tobacco I come from the time when there was actually tobacco grown here in Scott County and people had it.
I'm not sure everybody's gonna have
Yeah,
that.
nobody will know. But we used to call it remade, but it's like a landscape or plant covering. It'll be a light white. You can cover it with that. It just depends on why you're covering it.
Okay.
If you're thinking to cover them to keep insects away from them, you can do that. I don't know if you covered them to try to keep out the rabbits and that sort of thing, if that would work. You know, I've seen deer get in there and just clomp around and get everything all twisted up. So generally, there's not a lot of reason to cover up your tomatoes once the danger of frost is past.
Okay, yeah. All right.
Let's see, have I had anything else? Oh, also, go out and inspect your plants from time to time. Don't be a stranger out there. That's the best way to keep ahead of something, is to, you know, every day or every other day, go out there and look around. Lift up the leaves, see if you see any little aphids or anything like that, you know, because if you get ahead of it, and it's just a few, you have a lot better chance of catching it. And especially like when you see leaves dying, cut those off and destroy them. Take them out of the garden.
Are there good companion plants for tomatoes?
Well, you know, there are, it's sort of like anecdotal information, you know. I've heard like, well, let's see, what is it with tomato plants? Tomato plants actually have a strong scent themselves. So generally, you know, when there's companion planting, the plant that you're planting alongside it either has a really strong scent that bugs find, they don't really like it. So tomatoes already have a strong scent, that sort of thing.
I read recently basil, but I couldn't tell if the author of the piece I was reading was just thinking of food that goes well together.
You know, that's not a bad thing. Because having your basil and your tomatoes and having pesto, making your own fresh right on, that is really good stuff. It really is good stuff. So whatever, you know, I'd say that's a great companion for tomatoes.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I see farmers out there with their hoes, and sometimes they loosen up the dirt around the plant, and I'm sure part of that is to get rid of the weeds.
Right.
But I also heard it was good to loosen up the dirt around the roots. Is that true?
Yeah, some things you do want to do that. You know, tomatoes. Well, I don't know if you're actually loosening up the roots, although you can. And remember I said when you cut a root, small amounts, that it'll actually stimulate more root growth. So that cultivation around there can do that. And also it keeps the soil maybe fluffed up and not compacted there.
That's what I was thinking.
Less likely to. Have you ever been out in a garden or seen some soil and, you know, it's just like you can actually break it off in little, like smoke cakes.
That's
your
my
garden.
soil, which we are totally working on.
Yeah. Well, you need some organic matter there, but yeah, if you start to see that, you take your hoe or your trowel and go around there and break that up, and that will help that.
Well, all right. I think that's all we have for today. I do encourage you all. This is just a fun activity. We thought maybe for Mother's Day, but you know, you can plant tomatoes other days of the year, just preferably after the frost date. But it's a lot of fun to have you in sharing it. They always have manuals at the Extension office about growing things.
And this has information about tomatoes, but also all other kinds of vegetables.
Yes.
Okay, and you can find these. We have them at the Extension office. Or you can also go online to the University of Kentucky publication, Extension Publications, and find this as well. It's ID 128. And I've actually brought some extra copies here for you guys if you want them. And then also don't forget your soil bags. If you all want these soil bags, you're welcome to them, okay?
Well, thank you so much, Sharon. We
You're
always appreciate having you.
I enjoyed this. I like it when we play in the dirt like this, don't
There
you?
we go. We have to do that.
I like more hands-on.
Well, thank you guys for listening. I hope this was helpful, and you'll have a lovely day.